summer is officially in swing, which means the party season is starting. And also, I feel like Dolphin Cove is one of the places that you take the kids over the summer holiday and you have that break. You go Ochi, you take them to Dolphin Cove.
The
What
year in school trips.
school trips, right? What stocks are you looking at for the summer?
Well, I think in the scheme of things, some of there are companies in a similar segment, entertainment segment, that sometimes see a little bit of a bump up during the summer months. I think one of the other things to note sometimes with the companies in these sort of segments is that we probably need to take a little different approach in terms of how it is that we look at them. So there's typically the approach to look at companies that have steady growth in revenue and profits when we're looking at things to buy. But there are some companies that have an cyclical performance, and so those revenue movements sometimes have some amount of correlation with economic performance, and those can be also good options. I think earlier when we were listening to your first guest, he pointed out that distressed communities don't really, for the most persons, don't provide much opportunities. But you can also look at companies that may seem to be in a struggling phase as companies that could be something that you could purchase on a low end price now that could have some amount of growth in the future. And one of the things that we notice about companies like these that have that sort of a cyclical nature is that they learn to manage direct costs well, and that helps them in terms of how it is that they're able to keep steady margins. In fact, for some companies, you may even see an uptick in margins during those tougher times, and that speaks, positively to how management and leadership is doing. I think the last time we'd have looked at ECL, we should have been one of those companies that were able to maintain margins. And so we want to take a look at MJE, Main Event Entertainment Group tonight, as well as we'll touch a little bit on the lab. And so for Main Event, they would have recently released their second quarter earnings results for the quarter ended April 30th, 2025. And the company would have generated revenue of about 306 million, and this would have actually been a decline year over year. And what they cited as a major factor was that there is a recovering economic environment. So we know that we'd have had hurricanes last year, and so the first quarter of this year, January to March, would have really represented the expectation that we'd have seen some amount of recovery coming out at that period. And also during these times when you have persons having less disposable income, the demand for entertainment can be a little bit reduced. But if you think about the fact that we're picking up in economic activities and we're going into a summer period, then there could be some amount of increased demand for such companies, the services of such companies. And, when we look back even at how it is that Main Event would have performed last year, the overall performance for 2024 was actually really lower than expected due to there was a dip in some of the traditional sources. And they would have pointed out that there were companies that would have actually reduced the marketing spend just based on the nature of the environment. And there was a bit of a higher cost. So if it is that we are forward looking and we're thinking that there could likely be improvements in economic activities, then you could see for companies such as these that have the cyclical link with economic performance that there could be some upside to come for them. And, one of the things you also know that companies tend to do is that during these tough times where they do have, a good backing in terms of capital or cash base, they tend to invest in capital so that they can make some amount of strategic shifts to go forward. So this helps them to prepare for when it is that the market dynamics start to shift in their favor. And we'd have noted that a company similar like Main Event would have started to have done some of those capital spend in the quarters prior. So they would have been doing that, and it would have reflected in higher costs, and that would have also had a hang in terms of the income statement. But remember that when you're kind of looking at a forward-thinking process, these are things that could be positive in the long term or in the long run. And similarly for Lab is another example of a company that is feeling the economic.
Before we move on to the lab, so Main Event, we need to point out, it's not just parties that they do. So they do conferences. Do you know if they have any involvement with the political arena? Because we're heading into that season now. There's going to be conference and this and that and all kinds of things requiring that type of service.
Right. So there is positive to come. And I think as economic activity pick up, then you'll start to see that persons who probably would have reduced in terms of the marketing budgets will start to do so. There are normally summer promotions that come about. And so a company like Lab that does some amount of content production is also one that could benefit in those areas when you think of just the time period that we're going into, as well as the expectation of in just the expectation that we could be seeing higher economic activity. And Lab would have also, during the tougher periods of time, invested in some capital investing in order to prepare for this change. Also, when you look at the balance sheet for main events, it really has low borrowing, so there's not much in terms of debt repayment that it has, and there's good cash balance. And I think what is really good for companies that are in the entertainment space that you may not expect when you look at other junior market companies is that they actually have been making consistent dividend payments even in last year when they had tough times. And so that points to how it is that we can probably frame our mindset in terms of sometimes how we're thinking about buying stocks and not just looking at companies. We look at the bottom line and it's growing, but to consider that it's an opportunity to look at companies even though they may not be having a net profit that is consistently growing, but there is likelihood that there could be benefiting in the future from growth in weather economic activities.
Interesting. Now, we also have the hurricane season, which is now upon us. It's June now. How is that likely to affect some of these companies that we're looking at?
That's a big risk because it would have been a factor that affected them for last year because last year would have had burial and we'd have seen where the disposable income reduced. Persons who would have been planning some events, marketing expenditures would have been, let's take a cut here going forward. So it is a big risk because when there is some sort of devastation, there are events that get postponed, there are events that get cancelled, and so there would have been some amount of spend for some persons. And you find that with our main events is that they're also branching off to doing their own events. So it's not just providing services for other persons' events, they're also building up their own book in terms of providing events. And so if it is that you look at it from that perspective, hurricanes do present a big risk for companies because it impacts your disposable income. If it is that there is a hurricane and there's reduced economic activity, then that's a factor because their performance is heavily linked to how it is that the companies perform, how the economy performs.
Philip is making a note that Main Event does work heavily with the government. He says, including renting AV equipment to the Supreme Courts. So, yeah, well, government and political parties, two different things. I was talking about election season, we're
So,
heading into that and a lot going on there. Yeah, David?
so, oh, apologies. So, just to, give a quick point about the political side. So, Main Event does, event management. When it came on to even the AGM for Supreme Interest today, I believe Main Event was there present in terms of the setup and design of the stage and location. So, in terms of, when the election is announced, which will be in a couple weeks or even months, you're likely going to just see, certain campaign or rallies being held at particular locations, and you might just see a person from Main Event, set up the location or coordinating parts of the event. So that's the kind of angle in terms of, where you might see the political impact. But don't forget that when it comes on to the political season, especially for Jamaica's election, you're going to see a lot more spending by the political parties, which does have a trickle-down effect in different areas of the economy. So you're going to see more media engagement, TVJ, Observer, papers, social media. You're going to see more political rallies and different events where you need to be fed. People need to have drinks and just coordinate transportation. So this accumulation season is a good little period of stimulation that can come to different parts of the economy. As I've been feeling it in terms of relative slowness. On the North Coast, the air traffic is down probably 5 to 10% this year so far. Based on the air traffic data, we're seeing in the Mavis numbers, they said that marketing spend has been cut. When you look on Labs numbers for the agency side, there's still a cut there as well. So you are seeing some level of contraction in the economy in different areas. So this expected election does, serve as a catalyst for some companies to spend more and, prepare for this development.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots
And
of economic activity during election season. I have a comment here from Sherwin Jodian. Sherwin says, what about 1GS? Don't they have a part to play in promoting these events online?
so, based on what I recall from
This
one
question
just
was for Jodian.
oh,
I think OneJS is more so search engine. I'm not sure about the promotion side of it. I know in terms of from
Oh,
what I
they're marketing. They do marketing.
oh, they do. Well, I think if it is that you think about it, that you're going into a period that you could see a buzz and excitement in the summer, there are lots of promotions that happen. A lot of companies do promotion, particularly snacks and foods, because children are out of school. You tend to see a little bit more of those type of promotions to get consumers engaged during this period. So if it is that they're actively in that space, then they could be getting some of that business as well.
You wanted to add, David?
yeah, so when it comes on to the marketing part, just to give some context. So from a search engine optimization standpoint, for example, look back at the TJH, offer for sale a couple months ago. You probably saw it all over social media pages, Glean or whatever page you went on, you saw it pop up in your face. So from the angle of search engine optimization and just coordinating those ads for their clients, that is where you're going to see 1GS, have its footprint in the sand. But one additional thing where Jody mentioned, food and snacks in the summer. So NEPA released their board decision report recently, and a lot of listed companies in the JSE have news to talk about. So environmental permit for construction and operation of distillery, brewing, and fermenting facilities at Lakes Penrose, St. Catherine by Wisinco Group Limited. That is new news, Kalila.
Wait,
Cinco's going to be a
say it again.
brewery.
I missed piece of it. What happened to Wisynco?
So let me repeat it again. Apologies. Environmental permit for construction and operation of distillery, brewery, and fermenting facilities at Lakes Pen Road, St. Catherine by
Oh,
Westinco Group Limited. And there's also another
distillery
permit
brewing.
for the construction and operation of hydrocarbon production, refining, storage, and stockpiling by Westinco Group Limited as well.
Hydrocarbon production. What's hydrocarbon stuff again?
Like natural gas, basically.
Oh,
Yeah, so remember like Westinco, the LNG facility that they use to cut down their JPS bill. So the brewery is the bigger part of the story, though. Still,
yeah. So beers and alcoholic beverages from Wisynco. Interesting.
and
That's a new space for them.
Bay West Development Limited has applied again back to NEPA to construct a resort development in Montego Bay. Bay West is a subsidiary of Pan Jamaica Group, and PESCO has also applied for a permit to construct and operate a production facility for hydrocarbons in Port St. Catherine. So, people all the time, you can find this information online, do your own research, and keep up to date with the market before the companies announce these developments. So, NEPA publishes their board decision reports every month under the Natural Resources and Conservation Authority Act and the Town and Planning Country Act. They tell if a company has been approved or declined for a particular permit. And on the last page of this document, of the June report, it says, Tropical Battery was approved for the export of hazardous waste.
A lot of news coming out this week. David, thanks so much for the updates. Before we go, David, you do have a clarification that you want to make. So let me give you that opportunity.
Sure. So, Gordon Swaby, wanted me to point out that, Edocal isn't, insolvent, based on Jamaican, the Jamaican law, not having debt restructuring, not having any inability to pay debts or declaring insolvent. He just wanted that to be clarified, basically.
Okay. All right. Thanks, David. And thanks again, Jodianne.